The 2003 Spike Video Game Awards Game of the Year nominees featured an all-star cast, including GTA Vice City, Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, and Tony Hawk's Underground. The winner, however, Madden NFL 2004. And this wasn't some sort of fluke, as Madden NFL 2004 was critically acclaimed across the board at the time and is still today considered an all-time classic across the Madden NFL series. In the present time, sports games are still some of the most popular games each year. However, the fan reception and the reviews have been terrible since then. So how do we get back to that pinnacle? Or better yet, will we ever truly be happy with our favorite sports games these days? There's a ton of things that we could point fingers to, so we'll start with the most obvious. Major sports games like Madden or FIFA run on a yearly release cycle. This means that you'll see a new game from the respective series every 12 months or so. To the developer, this is arguably their #1 marketing tool for the game. It's quite simple. For every season of the professional league starting, such as the NFL or the NBA, a new sports game will pop up around the same time the season starts. It makes a ton of sense from a marketing perspective, as both league and game can work together to potentially bring two different audiences together within the same game and boost sales across the board. So from a marketing standpoint, it's great. However, a ton of issues can be attributed to the game development because of this. Naturally, because you have a game every 12 months, devs are going to have a smaller time to develop your game compared to other competitors. They're taking their time and really crafting their best game possible in terms of a sequel, so you'll be going up against games and developers that have had multiple years to develop their games compared to sports titles that have to make a game every 12 months. I'd say the most interesting comparison for sports games, however, could be the Call of Duty series, which has featured a yearly release for their title series since Call of Duty 2 back in 2005. While both use a yearly release strategy, Call of Duty has used multiple lead developers across their games, giving their teams multiple years to develop their games across the board. Sports games only have their one respective development team, and also only have 12 months to create those games. Unlike Call of Duty, where they may spend more than 1 year creating that game, even though they are being released at a yearly rate. It's also important to point out that these sports game franchises are consistently sold at a $70 value every single year. While some games have shifted away from a more reduced price or potentially free to play with in-game transactions, sports game franchises are not only doing a yearly release, but they're making you pay full price at $70 and are also majorly incentivizing in-game transactions through their many different modes. Naturally, this financially driven strategy can cause a lot of turmoil within your fanbase, especially when your games don't live up to the standard that's been seen across the board, not only with your own sports game franchises, but compared to other games that are being released around the same time. To combat this and to keep up with other developers, sports games like to use what I dub customer ultimate marketing. The premise is that in your announcement trailer and all the media that comes with it, you have big things like big techie words such as hypermotion and field sense, with sense being capitalized for some reason to really hype up the game and is more technologically advanced than the previous ones. Things like new graphics, new animations, or potentially a new engine is typically what you'll see every single time a game is announced. You don't typically see things like gameplay additions, or new controls, or new game modes until later on. Typically, it comes down to a lot of these things are being used to hype up the game and make it seem better than it actually is. While fantasy games could hype up their storytelling and a brand new adventure and work on things of that nature, or FPS titles could work on their balancing as well as their mechanics within the game, sports games have to find a balance between both. Sure, you could have storytelling and better things with your single-player modes in sports games, as well as having better competitive balance within multiplayer modes. Sports games have to find a balance between both, while other game companies can choose what they wish to focus on. And because sports games are basically a mash of everything mixed into one, but are also forcing a yearly release, you find some things are simply wiped out in different releases. You might not see your favorite game mode get any sort of update for multiple years. Not because it's been neglected, or maybe it's because it's been neglected, but mainly because there's just not enough time and there's so many things that they need to focus on that they need to get things done in other ways or potentially cut some corners to do so. So when you consider other games, they have a very small restricted number of things that they might be adding for game modes. A single player game might just focus on the single player aspects and are able to do things very deep in terms of what they're looking for as a single player game. On the other side, tactical shooters that are only multiplayer can actually hone in on the different balancing and are able to make things strictly focused on making the game fun from a tactical shooter standpoint. Sports games have a ton of different ways to play the game, with tons of different variety. Sure, you have your basic gameplay, but you also have controlling a single player and their storylines through, say, My Career in 2K. You also have things like being an owner or a GM and building out your roster and seeing how they play through simulation. But then you also have certain modes that you can spend a lot of money on, and it's been super popular these days, but it's also considered one of the biggest downfalls of the sports game industry in general, but that's probably a different video than this one. There's tons of different ways to play the game other than just strictly playing the game. After all, sports games are E for everyone, and they're E for everyone for a reason. They're trying to cater to a wide range of people, while other game developers can focus on a certain community. If a game developer wants to make it a very challenging type of game, then people who like those difficult games are going to enjoy it even more. And if you don't like difficult games, you simply won't play it. But sports games don't have that luxury, as they're looking to appeal to the widest fan base possible, so you have to make a game that is not only fun and skill expressive, but also has enough features that casual players can enjoy and see the differences on a year-to-year basis to justify spending $70 every single year. A competitive player looking to potentially go pro in the game may want different things that are related to what they wish for, such as skill expressive moves, different things that can make them feel like they're getting the most out of the game possible. However, you might also have casual players, or dubbed casual players, that might want things more like presentation-wise, more details that are minor in certain senses, but competitive players might not like those features because they take away from the game development for their competitive side of things. So now we're juggling a yearly release and trying to get people to justify spending $70, but now we're also juggling two completely different fan bases in the competitive side of things and as well as the casual side of things. To make matters worse, sports games also have to juggle the fact that they are in fact labeled after a sport. Sports games are emulating a real-life sport, which means if you're doing that, you have to find a way to cater to people who are coming from that sport. This means that you might have to juggle realism versus video game playability. You probably want a little bit of both, as you want that sports game to look like the sport that you can see on TV or what you're playing in real life. However, you also have to be realistic to the fact that it is in fact a video game being played on a controller, and you're just not going to be able to replicate the real life sport equivalent one-to-one through the video game. A lot of people can't grasp this and want the game to be as realistic as possible. However, if a game is very realistic, it might seem boring to people who want a game that's very playable as a video game. This can also clash with the competitive versus casual side of things, as a casual player might want things to be as realistic as possible because that's what they're looking for, and they're probably coming from watching or playing the sport. However, a competitive player might want something that is as playable as possible. Maybe some things aren't super realistic in the grand scheme of things, but as long as it's something that is very fun and skill expressive for them, it doesn't matter as long as it at least mostly resembles the sport. So what does all of this mean? Well, to put it simply, game development is like a set number of sliders. All of these sliders are what form the basis of your game. Maybe you're more single player oriented or multiplayer oriented, and you're also looking at things like competitiveness and playability and graphics and all of these things. Certain developers might opt for a more lore-driven story-based narrative in their game. However, you might also look at other games like tactical first-person shooters that are looking for a pure competitive standpoint in the way that they craft their games. They have the ability to do this because they can craft their community as they seem fit. If you want a more competitive game, you'll make a more competitive game, and the people that are more competitive will play your game. Sports games don't have that luxury, as they find themselves essentially in the middle of all these things. You're juggling the fact that you have to make a game that caters to casual players, but also your most competitive audience. However, you also have to juggle the fact you're trying to make at least as realistic as possible of a game because you're emulating a real-life sport, but then you're also looking to emulate a game that is pretty good to play as a video game compared to all these other AAA games that you're competing against. You're also juggling the fact that you have to release a game every 12 months for $70, and you have to find a way to justify that price point for your players. So what happens? Well, you find sports games being in the middle of really all of these categories. Not too competitive, but not too casual. Not super realistic, but also pretty playable. At this point, sports games are destined to be average at best. Destined to be a mid-game for pretty much everyone. And when you juggle all these factors into one, that's where the problems start to arise. Tons of bugs that have been around for many years, features that feel unfinished or incomplete, modes that feel neglected for many years. The list could go on and on. But because you're forced to release a game every single year and also try to cater to the widest range of consumer base of all time, things just become average at best or incomplete. Unfortunately, I don't think sports games can be very good for a while until they can find the time or the resources to get it right. Unfortunately, I don't think you'll ever like your favorite sports games these days. Until something changes or we can actually find some time or resources to get things right, I don't think that games can ever get over this hump. Maybe something will change sooner rather than later, but unfortunately, I don't think you'll ever like your sports games. At least not for a little while at least. Thanks for watching.